was and is. I mean, in fact, there's 3 units of the Chernobyl nuclear facility still in operation. In any case, that food moved around.
Well, this is an extremely serious problem. How do you get enough food for people if the land is contaminated for 3 centuries? And not only are you worried about grains like wheat and rye, but you have to also worry about mushrooms. Doesn't sound very important, but mushrooms are a very big part of the food supply in that area. And these are extremely contaminated.
The book concludes, based on now available medical data, 985,000 people dead.
Mm-hmm.
The data, however, just covers 1986 to 2004. Is that, as we open the program, mentioning 1 million casualties, would that be essentially the number that became victims of Chernobyl?
I believe that's correct, yes, that we will see that many. We know, for instance, that of the people called the liquidators, these were the young men and women who were recruited largely from military, from countries all around the area to go in and try and put out the fires and contain the Chernobyl mess. 15% of them have died. And now these were young men and women, not, you know, we're talking 18 to maybe 30.
Dr. Sherman, in terms of the amount of radioactivity emitted from the plant, there too there's a big discrepancy between what's revealed in this book and what's been acknowledged up to now.
Absolutely, and if a small amount was emitted, then we have to conclude that low levels of radiation are extremely damaging. If large levels were emitted, then we have to understand how much damage has been done. But we really don't know yet because nobody has been able to go in and find out what is actually left in the reactor that is leaking into the groundwater.
What does this say about the safety of nuclear power? I mean, the nuclear industry, the nuclear establishment, because of a lot of the nuclear industry involves government entities, pushes on to revive nuclear power, to create a nuclear renaissance, to build many, many more nuclear power plants. What's the lesson of Chernobyl and that?
I think the lesson of Chernobyl is that we should be very cautious before we push technology. I mean, we were told that there was no problem with the British petroleum drilling in the Gulf of Mexico. There is one issue of technology where engineers do certain things, but they don't understand the biology. They don't understand what is happening to life around these installations. And I think that Chernobyl is the biggest lesson of what has happened to all species that were contaminated. No exceptions.
I mean, the book indeed talks about owls, and could you elaborate on some of the effects on animals?
One of the scientists whose photograph is on the cover of the book is Tim Mousseau from the University of South Carolina. He's led about over 25 groups of scientists to the Chernobyl area, and they have studied insects and birds and animals and owls and all kinds of different animals as to what's going on. He said one of the trips he made that he suddenly realized there were no bees and there was no fruit falling on the ground. And he realized there was no fruit falling on the ground because there was no bees that had pollinated the trees. So he is predicting, and this may indeed happen, that there could indeed be a complete loss of species around Chernobyl as a result of these isotopes that are still decaying that could wipe out entire species. You know, after all, it is a major bird transport area, a migration area, And we don't know what's happening when the birds come through, eat whatever they can find on the ground, and then fly on, dropping the berries further on after they've left the Chernobyl area.
The genetic impacts. I mean, radioactivity has an enormous effect on genes. Speak on that.
These are unlikely to be improved. Once you get a genetic defect, it becomes transmitted generation after generation after generation. So these defects that are occurring in humans, in birds, in plants, are unlikely to improve the species as they occur.
What kind of genetic defects are you speaking of?
Well, in humans, we're talking about brain defects, heart defects, limb defects, children without arms, hydrocephalic babies. In birds, we're looking at changes in the feathers and in the beaks and in their brain size. You talk about bird brains. These birds are not as smart, and they're not going to be able to function as well as the birds that are not changed. We know that the plants have been changed irreversibly. You know, this is not rocket science. We know where these isotopes go. We know that iodine goes to the thyroid. We know that strontium-90 goes to bones and teeth, particularly of the unborn. We know that cesium-137 goes to the heart and to the muscles. This is not a mystery. And if we know this, we can predict what the adverse effects are going to be. And indeed, they turned out to be just that, and it's proven in this book.
This has to constitute one of the, well, the claim that just a few thousand people died as a result of the Chernobyl disaster, one of the biggest lies in history, no?
Absolutely. And they've been able to get away with it. I mean, we need to put pressure on the WHO and the United Nations to separate the WHO from the IAEA.
Not just on the international level with the International Atomic Energy Agency and the World Health Organization. Here in the United States, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has too tried to minimize the impacts of radioactivity.
You're absolutely correct. And I can go back to the Atomic Energy Commission before the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. I worked for the AEC at the University of California in 1952. That was my first job out of college. And if I could figure out, with my limited experience at that time and my limited education at that time, that radiation was harmful, then other people could figure it out. We have had secrecy and lies to the American public for decades about the effects of nuclear radiation. There have been cover-ups, there have been falsification of data, there have been people who said, well, don't worry about a little strontium-90, don't worry about the tritium coming out of the plant. We know that Davis-Besse almost melted within an inch of its containment as a result of poor maintenance. And I believe it's just a matter of time before we have another nuclear problem somewhere in the world, if not in the United States.
Well, why? I mean, you were within the nuclear establishment way back. We're talking about a half century ago.
Yes.
Plus. I mean, it had to do with money? Does it have to do with promoting a technology that these people are connected with, the nuclear scientists? Why the lying? Why the deception?
I think it has to do with many things. I think it's the money and the control is on corporations who are promoting nuclear technology. But we also have enormous scientific ignorance in this country. People who really don't understand biology. I think if I lined up 20 people let's say in a mall someplace and said, put your hand over your liver, I'll bet you half of them couldn't do it. And to explain to people what's happening with nuclear radiation, I think our educational system is so poor these days that children are not learning about biology and physics and chemistry, and it's essential because it's such a major part of our culture and our economy.
As you plowed through all this data, the consequences of Chernobyl, did the experience back decades ago, connect in any way to what you were doing?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this has been known for decades. The adverse effects of radioactivity have been known for decades. This is not something that has just occurred in the last couple of years. I mean, scientists who have any knowledge whatsoever of physics can figure out where a isotope is going to go in a body or in a plant or in a bird. I mean, this is not mysterious kinds of science.
What does Chernobyl represent? I mean, if we're talking 1 million dead, what does it represent in terms of technological history or the current technological scene? What does it mean?
I think it represents very strongly that we cannot depend on technology, nor can we depend on humans who operate and design this technology, because the ultimate failure is human failure, as happened at Chernobyl.
But you're talking here about health consequences on the most massive of scales.
Yes, indeed. Around the entire northern hemisphere.
Wherever the fallout was, people ended up dead.
They wound up dead, and they wound up with children who were grossly impaired intellectually and medically, and this is going on. It hasn't stopped yet. It's still going on.
Dr. Sherman, how can people get a copy of this book?
They could contact me by email. I am ToxDoc, T as in Tom, O-X, D as in Dorothy, O-C, .js at verizon.net. And I hope to have information on how they can get copies of this book.
Yes, I think it's very important at this time that people learn the truth about what happened as a result of the Chernobyl disaster. Thank you so much for doing this work, Dr. Sherman. This has been Enviro Close-Up. I'm Carl Grossman. Thank you for watching, and to get a copy of this or any Enviro video program, just visit our website at www.envirovideo.com. This program was taped on March 5th, 2011, 6 days before the nuclear disaster in Japan began unfolding. The clear lesson of Chernobyl and now the Japanese disaster: all nuclear plants should be shut down. They present a clear and present danger to life on Earth. No more nuclear plants should be built. Taxpayer subsidies for nuclear power must be stopped, and we must embark immediately on an energy program of efficiency and full implementation of solar, wind, geothermal, and other safe, clean energy technologies which are here today and render deadly nuclear power completely unnecessary.